Hello and welcome. We are gathered once again today. We're recording this on Wednesday, October 14th, and our guest today, as we continue to discuss issues with candidates for office, is Fred Keller, the congressman from the 12th District. He is, of course, a Republican who will be challenged by Democratic candidate Lee Griffin in the November 3rd election. Fred, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here today.
Always good to have you. And we talked about this briefly before, but let's just for the audience, you've unfortunately been able to not test positive so far for the COVID virus. How do you feel about the way both I guess the federal government and the state government have approached this?
Well, as far as and you do mention, I've been tested multiple times, and each time have been negative. And very recently, I was tested just to make sure we're following the CDC guidance and safe for our constituents. And I would encourage everybody to continue to do that. The COVID-19 response from the federal government, I can speak to that, I think was pretty remarkable. We passed about 4 pieces of legislation early on, the biggest of those being the CARES Act, which did provide the needed help for families, small businesses, governments, both state and local, and healthcare. So when you look at what Congress was able to come together and do, I think it was with the help of the administration, I think it was pretty remarkable to help Americans get through the pandemic. So handling that way, I think has gone very well. I think the governor, quite frankly, could have included more of the General Assembly and, quite frankly, the counties. Much like the president allowed the states to have some decisions and do some things, I think it would have been good for the governor to include some of the leadership at the counties because they know what's unique to their part of the state. And I think that would have probably gone a long way in helping everybody be unified through the whole process.
Now that the president has suffered through this himself, are you surprised at all that he hasn't seemed to have changed in any way how he's approaching? He's doing campaign stops now with big crowds and with no masks. And are you surprised at all that hasn't changed?
Well, the thing I'd like to say is I think we all take it very seriously, and it's unfortunate that any American suffers the coronavirus and gets sick, and the fact that we've had people that have passed from it is really a concern. But the thing I'll say is the president, I think, took it serious from the beginning, taking the decisive and preventive action on the travel bans and putting together a daily task force, assembling that coronavirus task force and holding the daily briefings. So looking at what they do, look at what happens and the screening they do at the events. It's one of these things where the right to assemble is the right to assemble, and I think people are taking the precautions they see fit for themselves.
So do you feel comfortable at one of those rallies?
I've been to a couple of those rallies. I was down in Harrisburg.
Right.
And I guess I would say, and having been tested since then and been negative, I would say that we can take precautions as Americans when we're given the CDC guidance and do the things that we feel appropriate, and go on protecting the people that need to be protected, but also go on with our life as Americans.
Now, there has been obviously a lot of back and forth between Mnuchin and Pelosi on another round of aid. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere right now, and I know you voted against the Second HEROES Act. Where do you see that standing, and is it probably not going to happen until after the election at this point?
I would hate to put odds on anything that will or will not happen in Washington and the time frame. I would hope that something could be done sooner rather than later. But the important part I'd like to mention on that is whatever we do for coronavirus relief going forward. Early on, we put out a massive, it was $3 trillion. And to put that in perspective, the government's budget is about $4.3 trillion. So almost 3/4 of the federal annual budget we put into the CARES Act. So what we need to do going forward, knowing more about the disease we're facing, is the relief needs to be targeted to those policy things and those effects of coronavirus and not have other policy items in it that are totally unrelated. And the speaker making the comment that when the Republicans come with $2 trillion, she needs to understand it's not the Republicans' $2 trillion and it's not her $2 trillion. It's the American people's $2 trillion. And we should be very careful that we're not putting other policy items into that, as was in the HEROES Act, in both of them actually.
Okay, so one of the things, obviously, we have ongoing confirmation hearings for a new Supreme Court justice right now. And while it was sort of assumed that the right to an abortion in Roe v. Wade might be the centerpiece, it actually, whether it was politically strategic or what, has turned into more about the Affordable Care Act and its future. Now, the Republican Party and the administration and many of the governors across the state are trying to basically get it overturned, which may or may not be a good idea. But is there, and I've asked this question, I remember sitting at this table, I've asked, I think, you this question, I've asked Lou Barletta and Tom Marino this question, is there a Republican plan for health care that you're comfortable with moving forward should the Affordable Care Act be overturned?
Well, the first thing I would say is when you look at the case, it's not the entire Affordable Care Act that is being challenged. Okay, there's only portions of it. The mandate that was the paying that was taken away. So there's only a portion of it that's being challenged. So let's take care of that. The other thing is, and I know it often gets time that's about pre-existing conditions. Republicans want to protect pre-existing conditions first and foremost in anything we do. In fact, the president signed an executive order to that effect. So when you look at that, the Affordable Care Act. In fact, we were at a business yesterday in Union County, and we have a bill out there, HR 19, that starts to deal with it's a bipartisan components in that bill that the speaker isn't moving, but that would start to deal with drug prices and some other things. But what we've been hearing from people, and we just heard from a business in Union County yesterday, is we need transparency and we need competition if we want to look at this. And we can always talk, and I know it was talked a lot about in the Affordable Care Act, about coverage. This is going to cover so many people. Well, getting coverage and getting care are two different things. And the Republicans' plan is to make sure that health care is affordable so people can get care, not just coverage. So that it's competition, it's transparency. It deals with health savings accounts, flexible spending accounts, employers allowing to contribute money into an account tax-free for people if an employer doesn't pay can't afford to pay for the plan themselves, they can give the individual money to be able to purchase a plan on the market. So there's a lot of things that we've discussed and would put in a bill. But the point is, and the first thing we need to make sure is we're not just talking about coverage, we're talking about people being able to access care.
So, the president, since before he was elected, has said there was going to be a better, a cheaper or less expensive health care plan. I'm looking for details. I haven't really seen it, and it's 4 years later.
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing was, and we could talk about what people promised. I mean, in the Affordable Care Act, you were promised you could keep your doctor and you would save $2,500 a year, and I think we all know that didn't happen. So when we look at it, the plan we put together, we want to make sure we have input, like we did with HR 19 to start dealing with the prescription drug things. But the things that we need to do, and we all know it works, is when you have transparency and you have competition. And things like selling insurance across state lines and opening things up that would create that healthy competition that would drive down the cost and drive up the quality of health care.
Right now, we have a temporary stoppage of the payroll tax that funds Social Security and Medicare. That is, I guess, is supposed to end at the end of the year. Is that a concern? Should people who are counting on Medicare and Social Security, should they be at all concerned about the financing for those programs?
Well, the one thing is when you look at that executive order, it's not required to happen. Okay, so it's a thing that an employer can do with their employees, whether or not that's paid in, and it's one that has to be repaid. Okay, and what that is looking at doing, I'm not going to get into the whole things of why the president would have proposed that or doing it, but it's a matter of trying to give people money now to make it through the pandemic and then repay that back later. It's sort of like having money right now and not having to pay for a loan. What I would be concerned about if I was a senior citizen and I was on Medicare, I would be concerned about the former vice president's plan of putting 5 million more people on Medicare, because we already know senior citizens have to buy supplemental insurance now. And putting 5 million more people onto a government program is really going to strain the resources that are there to fund it now. So I would be more concerned, if you're concerned about benefits for seniors, about that plan. It's just going to be putting more and more people on the government plans that are designed for our senior citizens. That Medicare for all, and the former vice president admits it, 5 million people. So if you're a senior citizen, think about that. You're already paying for Part B and other insurance plans. And guess what? We're going to take and we're going to lump 5 million more people on there. And I've heard it talked about many times. Well, my Social Security went up, but so did my payment for my Medicare and stuff. Okay, what do you think is going to happen when you put 5 million more people on it that aren't on it now, that aren't seniors? So I think there should be some concerns, and those kind of questions also need to be answered.
Okay. Bill?
I want to follow up on the Republican plan moving forward. You sort of gave some things, competition, transparency, things like that. They seem like reasonable things that you could codify. And here we are 4 years later, and we're not there. Why can't we get those simple things you just talked about into a plan out in the public where that we keep hearing 2 weeks from now we'll get our plan out, 2 weeks from now we'll get our plan out? Why can't we just codify it the way you sort of gave us in second grade terms there?
Well, I would say that I would love to do that. But when you look at what's happening, and I'll use the HEROES Act as an example, when legislation is put out by politicians simply for messaging, you don't get a whole lot done. So that's the kind of thing that needs to happen. The party and majority in the House, that's who determines who runs the bills in the House. I mean, and why don't we have police reform? We don't have police reform because Senator Scott put a bill out there and said, I will take up to 30 Democrat amendments. You would think that would be reasonable, that the Democrats would get the 60 votes so they could at least discuss it. Guess what didn't happen? They couldn't get the 60 votes. So it's the politics of people wanting messaging going into an election, which is totally wrong.
For someone like you that's been able to work across the aisle in Harrisburg and attempt to do it in in Washington, how difficult is it to see politics get in the way of what seems like smart policy?
Well, I can again point back to what we just talked about. It's really when we're trying to help put policy forward that will benefit our constituents, not just in PA 12, but all across our nation. I think we should sign on to that rather than looking at who can score the next political point. I've never been about that. I'm about results, getting things done, and I will continue to work to that. And I think everybody that goes out and votes on November 3rd should be looking at how people approach things and whether they think the person's going to be able to get those things done or work in that direction. That's what I'm doing. That's what as you mentioned, I've done it in Harrisburg, whether it's renewable energy or other things.
You talked about November 3rd. That's a good segue into to election safety, mail-in ballots, and things like that. I mean, right off the bat, mail-in ballots, are they safe? Is the election secure?
Well, I would say that we've done mail-in voting, absentee balloting for years in Pennsylvania. Okay, that's where a person requests a ballot and a ballot is mailed to them. You fill it out and you send it back. And even in Pennsylvania, I believe you can trace your ballot now and see that. I would say in the case where people are requesting them, they're filling out the ballots and they're being returned. You can count on safety. I would say we need to follow the laws that have been established that have worked for many years. The concern I would have is why do people want to change those laws, meaning our governor and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, several weeks before an election, when we know we've done it previously. In the states where they're just mailing ballots out to people that are registered to vote, I think there should be some concern there, and I'll give you an example of that. Suppose I'm, in 2016, I was a junior at Bucknell University, and I lived in Connecticut. Okay, but I could register to vote here, and I did. I'm no longer in Pennsylvania, okay? And if we're just going to mail out ballots, is a ballot going to be mailed to that person at that address? Right. And if it is, then who fills it out? Right. What happens to it? Right. The chain of custody is very important. And that's why I think it's when you have somebody apply for a ballot, it gets sent to them, that's a totally different situation. But in the states where they don't do that, I think there's reason for concern.
As a representative, I mean, how do you view your role in educating the voters? You talked about follow the process and follow the rules. How do you view your role as making sure the people of the 12th district know how to do this process, from step one to step whatever?
Well, that's a process, and I'll be honest with you. When I was in school, and I don't know if Mr. Scheller had the same teacher I did. I had Mr. Schlegel.
Oh, yeah, Chuck Schlegel.
Yeah, Linda Culver's dad. And what a great teacher in helping us understand the process. I think part of it's up to the school, part of it's up to the parents, and it's making sure that the information is available. And in today's age, you could go to the state website, you can go to the federal website, and it lays out the dates, it lays out how you do it. So I think making sure that those things are up to date on the government websites. I mean, you're talking about the government's responsibility. I think that we need to do that. When people ask questions, they need to get the honest answers on them, and so people can look and say, okay, if I want to vote, I got to be registered by this date, and here's where I go to register. I mean, Snyder County, our county websites, but I know Snyder County puts the polling places and where they are. So I think there's a lot of information out there, and I think it's a team effort making sure that our kids, from before they're able to vote, understand the importance of it and understand the process.
To stay on election results, President Trump has been, for the better part of 2 months now, saying the only way he can lose the election is if it's rigged or somehow, fraudulent, which is why I ask about mail-in votes. Your thoughts on him saying he's not going to accept the election results unless it goes his way?
I don't think the president said that. And if you really want to look at who has not accepted results of an election, all you have to do is look at the last 4 years of what's happened with our institutions in Washington, and the things that the former Secretary Clinton has said and done. You look at that other people have tried to undo this election of a duly elected president. So if there's anybody that's not accepted the results of an election, it's certainly not the president of the United States. It's people that never, and not that you have to support him, but people that have been that much against him from day one.
But that's been going on, for at least the last two presidents, with Mr. McConnell saying, his goal was to make President Obama a one-term president.
Well, but that's one thing other than trying to say the president's an illegitimate president, which Speaker Pelosi said. Okay. She called him an illegitimate president, which is wrong for the Speaker of the House to do. I don't know that any Republican ever called President Obama an illegitimate president.
Okay.
I just questioned where he was born.
And Hillary Clinton started that. Hillary Clinton started that, Dennis.
There was a resolution that you actually voted for the other day that says this resolution affirms the commitment of the House of Representatives to the orderly and peaceful transfer of power called for in the Constitution, and expresses the intention of the House that there will be no disruptions by the President or any person in power to overturn the will of the people. So any concern there's probably no reason for concern that there would be less than a peaceful transition should the President lose?
We've done that since the beginning of our republic, and that's a hallmark of the United States of America.
Absolutely. And it never probably has come up before, but...
2016 it has.
Okay. Fred?
I'm going to drop down to, I'm going to talk to broadband.
Yes.
We've been talking to all our candidates about broadband, and in this area, as you know, now more than ever, it's been a problem trying to school our young children from home, and the conversation just continues to go on election after election after election, and it never seems to improve. What are your thoughts of where we need to go and how we're going to get there with broadband?
That's actually a really good thing that is a priority of mine. And we've seen some things work in certain areas of the district. Up in Tioga County, there's been some success with some grants they got to put broadband access. Bradford County's been doing some great things. But what we need to do from the federal government standpoint is look back to what we did with infrastructure for the federal highway system, the Eisenhower interstate system. When we got serious about it at the federal government and put that in as infrastructure, and said this is a vital part of what government's responsible for. And when you look at broadband and you look at how we do business today, that's commerce. The internet is commerce. It's healthcare with telemedicine and things we've covered under telemedicine like never before. So that's an important part. And of course, education. So what we need to do, and what I'm advocating for and going to continue to advocate for, is the fact that we treat that like, rather than have part of it in USDA and part of it in Homeland Security, I'm just pulling some things out, for example. Rather than have it piecemealed like that, let's be serious about it, and let's call it infrastructure, just like we did the highway system. I call it the infrastructure you don't see, and let's put that together in an infrastructure package to make sure we can deliver that to all parts of rural America.
So how do you accomplish that? I mean, I know you are serious about it because you've stated it before, but it just doesn't seem, it seems like after the election's over, the conversation kind of goes away.
Well, I don't think we see it going away. And one thing we can take, and whenever we are faced with adversity in America, we rise to the challenge, we defeat it, we overcome it, and we learn. And I think one thing we're going to learn from this is the importance of doing exactly what I just said, making that broadband internet access available in rural America, all across America, and putting it in its own infrastructure or as part of the infrastructure, but not piecemealed in areas. So I think we've learned that, and I think that will keep the discussion going because more people have been relying on it. Some people may not go back. You know, they might have permanent work from home now where it works for if you work in an office or whatever your setting is. So, and the fact of delivering health care through telemedicine. So I think we've learned some things of how important, not that we didn't think it was important before, but it brought it up to the top, I'll say.
By making broadband a national infrastructure priority like you're describing it, does that make your job in what's a pretty rural 12th district? It's got to be tough to argue to somebody from Philadelphia or Los Angeles or Chicago, we need broadband in my district.
Well, I would just simply go back to what we talk about whenever we talk about anything, and talk about in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, we're a commonwealth, so we do things that benefit everybody. You put broadband infrastructure here in rural America, it's going to benefit the people in the urban areas. Because look at all the things that come out of the urban areas. That's where agriculture is. That's where energy is. That's all the things that come out of these areas. And if we have that rural broadband, we're going to make sure people are here to be able to continue to deliver that food supply, deliver that energy, and all those things that the urban areas rely upon.
Are you hearing in Washington that it is a priority?
Yes, both sides of the aisle.
It's funny though, getting government to spend money on infrastructure is tough, as you well know, from the state perspective. I mean,
We were able to get it done though, Dennis.
Yeah,
I was part of that.
yeah, well, before you and I were both paying attention, Eisenhower did too. There was
Yeah.
a highway system that got built. And what was it? How many years before that was there electricity brought to the rural areas? It can be done.
Rural electric, yes.
Yeah, it can be done, but I'm with Fred. I think it seems like something that gets talked about a lot, but then it's not sexy and it doesn't get taken care of. So I assume that's a priority for you.
That is.
Okay.
Representative Musser in that seat just last week said he's never been around it where it's been part of almost every discussion. And maybe that's what you're talking about with it being a priority for everybody now.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about your Congressional Bureau of Prison Reform Caucus. I guess you had a meeting just the other day. Was that the first meeting?
That was the first meeting of the caucus. And let me explain a little bit about why we felt the need to do this. And this goes back to, and we've introduced some legislation dealing with some actions of Bureau of Prisons. The first thing we did was Eric's Law, which deals with when a corrections officer is killed and after someone's convicted of how the family can make sure they get closure and justice for that. But that's one thing. But we have sent some letters, a couple letters the end of last year regarding corrections officers and staffing levels. And we've also done some about making sure the collective bargaining agreements are adhered to by the Bureau of Prisons. And then the pandemic probably sort of highlighted it a little bit more because we introduced another bill called the Pandemic Act because the Bureau of Prisons was moving inmates from one part of the country to another during the pandemic and trying to get an answer out of not the local institutions here in PA 12 because the wardens and the corrections officers do a great job right here at each institution. It's what many refer to as the swamp and the accountability from the director of the Bureau of Prisons to giving us answers and making sure that we can advocate for the people who are our constituents that work in these facilities and the communities around them. And having seen the lack of transparency, I actually introduced some more legislation that mirrors what Leader McConnell had as far as confirming the Bureau of Prisons by the Senate. So you look at some of those things, so it can't be somebody that has been around for 4 or 5 administration. It just tends to rise up to that level, and here they are. So looking at that and the ability of not to get answers, I talked with some of my colleagues, and they were experiencing some of the same things. So we put together the Bureau of Prisons Reform Caucus, and we had our first very successful meeting with some action items out of it. And I don't have that list of action items on here, but some of those things on there are making sure that the prisons can hire deal with their own staffing rather than having that come out of DC. I worked in private industry. I ran a factory with 200 some employees right here in Snyder County. The people we needed to hire and hired didn't come out of Lancaster County where the headquarters was. We made those decisions right there at that location, and I think our prisons should be able to do the same thing. There needs to be some accountability. We need to make sure that they're doing things that are correct to keep the inmates safe, to keep the corrections officers safe, and to keep our communities safe.
One of the early parts of the caucus, I know you were very proactive and aggressive with the transfer of inmates amid the pandemic. We've just had, I think we went from 92 at the two Allenwood facilities. Now I think they're down into 30 active cases, and now there's 4 in USP Lewisburg today that weren't there yesterday. Have you gotten a response from the Bureau of Prisons about that policy, about that transfer? I mean, is that policy stopped, and are you getting the response you want to see there?
Well, the response I wanted to see early on was no movement of inmates. We didn't see that right away. However, they did for a period of time when we were at the height of things. They did put a pause on that, but we're continuing to work to make sure that there's parameters around this so that we're not shipping individuals from one location to another that may be infected.
Okay.
Brett?
I think it's pretty obvious that we're going to have a new appointment to the Supreme Court. But I'd like your thoughts on the Senate pushing forward with the nomination.
Well, when you look at what's happened over the course of history, and there's been 29 individuals that have been nominated to the Supreme Court in an election year. The most recent prior to this one was in 2016, and the Senate, where their duty is to advise and consent. For whatever reason, and I'm not going to get inside somebody's mind, their advice and consent was not to hold the hearings. I don't fault anybody in the administration for making the nomination. I know a lot of people say the president should have done it. He did the same thing that President Obama did. So he nominated. And quite frankly, having listened to and watched some of the hearings, I think that Amy Coney Barrett is one heck of an extraordinary lady that certainly is qualified. So, the Constitution says that the president shall nominate and the Senate shall advise and consent. So
I think at some point you would agree that in many cases, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something.
well, I don't think it says the president shall nominate. I mean, they're supposed to do this.
Oh, no, nominating is fine. And Obama did nominate Garland, no question. My question is the follow-through and the Senate holding hearings before the election, much, much closer to the election than the Garland hearings would have been.
And I would say had Harry Reid been in charge of the Senate in 2016, they probably would have held the hearings.
I don't have any question about that. And I guess is where it comes down to then. This becomes much more of a political process than I suspect we would be.
But again, the Constitution is being followed, and that's the document upon which our republic operates, and is operating with the parameters of the Constitution. That's it. What I really think is extraordinary is the fact that the former vice president won't be straight with people and thinks people don't deserve an answer on court packing. I think that's outrageous. You want to talk about things that are outrageous? That one really, to me, is.
Well, I suspect that question will get asked and asked and asked until it gets answered.
I don't think it will get answered.
Well, we'll see.
It's an easy one, Dennis.
Well, it seems like it is, but I also think to some degree it's what he says. It's a distraction to the issue of the current confirmation.
But for him to say, Dennis, that people don't deserve to know the answer, come on.
No, I'm not going to argue with him.
What other answer won't he give us on any other policy? That's an easy policy, Dennis. Mm-hmm. That's an easy one. So if there's a really tough one, is he not going to tell us? Does he think we not have the right? Or are we his subjects?
Okay, I'm not going to argue with that. I just I think that ultimately, I think the last poll I saw, most people, a slim at least majority, thought that this should not have moved forward right now. I have nothing bad to say about the current candidate. I'm just saying this is obviously become a political thing on both sides of the aisle. It's no longer good of the country, good of the policy. It's politics, and perhaps I'm naive to think it ever was other than that. You voted to condemn QAnon and all the conspiracy theories it promotes in a House resolution. Sometimes the president and the others continue to be a little more friendly towards those groups, and I know there's other groups on the other side of the equation. Are you concerned? Let's put it this way: are you concerned about the division in this country being worse than it's ever been, and are you concerned that there's not really an obvious road back?
Well, again, as Americans, I think what we do best is we come together and we do the right things. Unfortunately, there are people who are stoking the division, and I don't think it's any one person, but anybody that does it should not be doing it. But I think that what we need to do is we need to come together as Americans, and as I voted on that to make sure that we condemn people that are going to divide us, and it's okay to have healthy dialogue and debate. But then what you do is you come together and you say, okay, this is the decision we made, we move forward. But for people to and it started just before this year. I mean, when you have elected people saying that you need to go out and get in people's faces and do things like that, and that's happened, they shouldn't be doing it. And that does not help our situation as far as moving forward together. So I would call on anybody that's elected to office or in any position of authority to make sure that we're making sure we treat each other with respect.
Some people believe the president could do more to help bring people together. What are your thoughts on that?
I think everybody's going to say you could do more. I think there's plenty of blame to go around, quite frankly, when you had Maxine Waters saying some of the things she said over the years and some of the high-level Democrats.
But this is the top office.
Well, so is the Speaker of the House when she calls our president an illegitimate president.
Well, the president is the top person.
Well,
that's the way the country looks at it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we also have a concerning issue with treatment of people of all various colors and persuasions equally in this country. And obviously it came to the fore even further than it had been in the past with the murder of George Floyd. Is there something that you as a congressman, the Congress in general, should be doing now? I think there's a lot of rhetoric on both sides, but what needs to be done to ensure that everyone gets equal treatment under the law?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is I've had many roundtable discussions with law enforcement across PA 12. In fact, I had one here in Sunbury. We were in Williamsport. We were in Mansfield. We stopped and saw some sheriff's departments across the district in Snyder County and Lycoming County. So when you look at what we should be doing, we should make sure that our law enforcement, many of them, most of them, are great, outstanding people. Unfortunately, in the case of George Floyd, some behave the way they shouldn't. And that's not unique to any profession. And the people that want to hold them accountable are the overwhelming number of great, outstanding law enforcement people. So one is we need to make sure we respect and honor our law enforcement people that are doing the job right. The other thing we need to do is we need to make sure we give them the tools, the training, to get the job done effectively. And that means, and it goes right back to Senator Scott's bill, to put out a framework there. And what we should be doing is not blocking that from even coming up for discussion in either the House or the Senate.
Is there a sense that there is something to be said for bringing mental health training and mental health professionals more into the picture? It feels like sometimes we expect our police officers to be expert in a field that they were never trained to be expert in.
I think a lot of times, and it was talked about accreditation, and that would be some of the accreditation things that need to happen to make sure our officers and our departments have the training they need. But it's not a one-size-fits-all policy either, because the Sunbury Police Department of 9 people is much different than an urban department in Philadelphia. So for us to say there's one way to handle that, you look at the accreditation, you look at things that need to happen. So I look at that as we need to make sure they have the tools. a lot of times when our officers get called out, somebody's probably not having a good day. And I think in a lot of cases, they do an outstanding job. And there's these cases where if there's somebody that's not behaving properly, that needs to be dealt with. There needs to be that accountability. And I don't know what happened previous to that, but we certainly need to look at those kind of things and hold accountable those people, whether it's in law enforcement, whether it's in politics, whether it's attorneys, you fill in the doctors, fill in the blank. They make sure they don't keep that position.
Okay, anything else, gentlemen?
I do have somebody. Harvey jumped on.
Oh, Harvey Edwards.
Harvey Edwards,
You know Harvey?
Hey, Mr. Edwards.
I saw in the paper there was some kind of vote on procedures that were being done along the border to women. I'm trying to get this correct because I don't have it, but there was a vote about operations that were being performed on women who were being held at the border. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. There's actually a bill, and Harvey, I'll tell you one of the things as somebody that votes on legislation, I want everybody to know, and everybody here knows from my history, that I don't vote on stuff that I haven't read and don't know what's in it. The point is, when you look at that whole legislation, it might have one piece of something in there, but then when you look at all the other things it does, and one of those, and I can cite this because I worked for a company who had to go to court to protect their First Amendment rights for their religious beliefs. So when you look at the whole bill, it's a little frustrating when somebody picks out one phrase or one part of that. What would do us a lot of service, Harvey, is if we had bills that didn't have so many things lumped into them on these policy decisions, and then we could really get some substantive work done without all this messaging. And quite frankly, there was a lot of things put into that just to be able to send out that kind of message, which I don't think is fair to any elected official that votes yes or no on a bill that had that many things in it.
And I would agree with that. It does seem to be piling on when those bills come. And so the last question is like a general question. Considering our area, what would you say is the most important issue for you to advocate for our region?
Okay. Can I take that in two parts, Harvey? The first part I would say is we need to take a look at the recovery from the pandemic and what we can do to make sure that our working families and our small businesses have the resources. And I was talking about that a little bit earlier today in a meeting. Also the daycares, so that they have the tools that they need to be able to operate, because if we have to have good quality daycare so that our working mothers and fathers can get back to work and knowing their children are in a safe daycare that can meet the needs of those children. So I would say immediately right now, we need to focus on that. And there's actually a bill before the House that I signed a discharge petition on that would help some of the small businesses and people with some of the paycheck protection and so on. The other thing I would say on a longer term, and we talked a little bit about it, is broadband internet access. That is huge. We talked about including that as part of a large infrastructure bill rather than a piecemeal thing like it's been over the years. And that's what I've been advocating for. And of course, another thing that I look at when I talk about infrastructure, we didn't get into it, was energy development and natural gas pipelines, because on any given day, up to 10% of the nation's natural gas comes out of PA-12. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us. And developing that energy will certainly develop a lot of revenue for the people that work in those jobs, so they're good family-sustaining jobs. But then it would also provide revenue to both the local governments, the Commonwealth, and the federal government to be able to afford some of these other things like the broadband internet access.
All right, Harvey, we do have to wrap this up. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, Congressman, for...
Hey, I'll tell Charity I saw you. Yep, good to see you.
All right, Harvey Edwards, one of the members of our Community Advisory Board here at the Daily Item. On behalf of myself and Managing Editor Bill Bowman and publisher Fred-Keller, thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you. And it's really, I just want to, if I could just close and say that it's really, really an honor to have been able to represent the people of PA-12 for almost a year and a half. I would really appreciate their vote and support on November 3rd. They're outstanding, hardworking, thoughtful people. And I understand that because I worked in a factory in PA-12. I ran a small business in PA-12. I ran that larger business, and I raised my family here. And I want to make sure that my kids, my grandkids, and everybody else's kids and grandkids have the opportunity at the American dream I had.
Okay, thank you. We'll leave it
Thank
at
you.
that.